Hey everyone, in this review for Immortals Fenyx Rising, I'll be using the pronouns they, them, and their when referring to Fenyx, as the gender of the character can be selected by the player and subsequently changed at any point after the prologue. Please enjoy, and thank you very much for watching. The story of Immortals Fenyx Rising follows Fenyx, a shield bearer and storyteller in the Greek army, as they set out to save several Greek gods so they can all team up and take down Typhon, a Titan monster who has broken loose from his prison and is now vying for control of the cosmos. At the beginning of the game, Zeus visits Prometheus atop the Caucasus Mountains, where he has been chained as punishment for giving fire to mortals. In addition to both Zeus and Prometheus having had their powers dampened by Typhon, several other gods have gone missing. Zeus asks Prometheus to speak with the Titans, as he believes only they can reason with Typhon and stop his crusade. Prometheus does not believe this will work, as his powers to glimpse into the future have been blocked by Typhon. Instead, Prometheus tells Zeus to look to the mortals for salvation, but Zeus is unable to since the mortals have been turned to stone. Prometheus makes a wager with Zeus, saying that if one mortal who wasn't turned to stone turns out to be Zeus's salvation, Zeus must end his punishment and set him free. If he's wrong, Prometheus must help Zeus stop Typhon, no matter the cost. Zeus agrees to the stakes, and Prometheus begins to tell the tale of Fenyx. Fenyx's tale begins with the great storm that wrecks their naval ship as the crew was on the way home from a victorious battle. Washing up on the beach of the mysterious Golden Isle, Fenyx awakens only to realize that everyone has been turned to stone. After finding their brother's sword and dispatching a few enemies, Fenyx begins to explore this strange island a bit more. After scouting the island from atop the statue of Hermes, Fenyx notices someone caught in the talons of a griffin. Chasing after the griffin in an attempt to help this person, Fenyx comes across a giant red pit, but not before noticing an axe that bears a striking resemblance to the Axe of Atalanta from legend. Before Fenyx can grab the axe, it is pulled into the pit by Typhon, who then taunts Fenyx to follow. The pit turns out to be a vault of Tartarus, which constitutes the game's puzzle chambers. Once the puzzle is solved, Fenyx obtains the Axe of Atalanta and leaves the vault, going on to keep searching for the person they were attempting to save. After solving some more puzzles, vaults, and acquiring Odysseus' bow, Fenyx comes across the mystery person, who reveals himself to be the god Hermes. Hermes tells Fenyx how he managed to escape Typhon's grasp and stay hidden from his gaze by stealing a piece of his eye, preventing the Titan from seeing the Hall of the Gods, the game's hub. After the initial shock of meeting a Greek god in the flesh wears off, Fenyx learns the tale of Typhon, along with why every mortal was turned to stone. Hermes tells Fenyx that they must rescue the missing gods Aphrodite, Ares, Athena, and Hephaestus. After doing so, they can take down Typhon together and end the threat to the cosmos. And thus, the prologue ends and the adventure of Immortals Fenyx Rising is officially kicked off. Before I get into detail about the adventure, I want to first talk about the Hall of the Gods itself, and two of its features in particular. Being the game's hub, it has a number of offerings for the player, including a place to upgrade weapons and armor, brew potions, upgrade health and stamina, a mission board, and a barber chair. The barber chair allows the player to change their appearance for free at any time in the game. This includes changing body types, which will also change the pronouns that Fenyx is addressed by. This means that you can start the game with male pronouns, and at any point, you can start to be addressed by female pronouns. Every single voice line of dialogue is changed to use the proper pronoun the player wishes, which is a great addition to the game. While there isn't a body type that will prompt non-binary pronouns, I still think it's a great step in the right direction of inclusion. What's really interesting is that you can mix and match body types, facial hair, faces, facial markings, head hair, as well as a choice of male and female voices, all to your heart's content. The other feature in the Hall of the Gods I want to address is Hermes' shop. By completing daily and weekly missions on the board, the player will earn Electrum, the currency required to purchase cosmetic armor, weapons, and mounts in Hermes' shop. However, in addition to Hermes' shop, there is also another store found in the game's pause menu. The difference between these two is that the currency you need for Hermes' items is earned by playing the game, while the currency required to purchase items in the other shop, called Immortals Credit, is acquired with real money. There is a wealth of items available in this premium shop, not all of which are cosmetic. There is a $40 season pass available, which promises 3 expansions, the release dates of which have not been announced. The prices of the credit packages range from $25 and $50 one-time offerings to infinitely available $5, $10, and $20 packages. Credits can be used to purchase cosmetic gear that seems to eventually come to Hermes' shop on a cycle, so this shop is mostly for folks who don't want to wait for that to happen. I understand that games are quite expensive to make, and companies need to make money in order to keep making games, but microtransactions in single-player games have never felt right to me. Additional single-player content aside, which I don't have any issue with, being able to buy the same cosmetics that are eventually available in the in-game shop, but for real money, feels a little predatory, especially in a single-player game. Again, they're only cosmetics, so it's not like it takes away from the game in any significant way, but it just feels like it was added for the sole purpose of making money, not to provide anything truly special to the player in return. Tack on the fact that this is a full-price game and it leaves me feeling especially uneasy about it. The world of Immortals Fenyx Rising is truly open, meaning that the player can visit any area at any time, walking from one end of the Golden Isle to the others. If you get tired of one god's quests, you can walk or warp to another area and help out someone else. Scattered around the island are magnificent structures and landscapes. From the Temple of Athena to Hephaestus' Forge, the world feels truly alive, even with all the humans being turned to stone. Day or night, the Golden Isle feels like a place of wonder, begging to be explored. Virtually every piece of terrain outside of the vaults is climbable, and after acquiring stamina upgrades, you'll be able to climb higher without the need of consumables. Anytime you reach the top of a god's monument, which acts as this game's towers, you'll be in awe at how diverse the landscape is. Thanks to a long draw distance, at least on the PlayStation 5 version that I reviewed the game on, you'll want to visit everywhere you can see. Every time you visit a new area or discover a new location, Prometheus gives a bit of context on what Fenyx has just found, leaving you wanting to repeat the cycle of scouting and discovery over and over again. As the game progresses, Prometheus narrates the major story beats whenever Fenyx comes across them, while Zeus provides some color, oftentimes off-color commentary. Whether it's a main story quest, a side quest, or a challenge course somewhere in the world, Prometheus will tell the tale of a character in Greek mythology, adding a rich flavor to the Golden Isle. As someone who thoroughly enjoyed reading Greek mythology in his younger years, I found this method of storytelling and world building to be excellent. Solving a mosaic tile puzzle would often result in a tale of a cosmic battle between Zeus and the Titans. Constellation puzzles would end with a message from the inventor Daedalus, often remarking about how his inventions wound up being a curse due to his son Icarus dying from one of them. There are a ton of puzzles scattered throughout the Golden Isle, and each one of them tells a story from Greek mythology. In addition to the in-game rewards for solving them, learning a bit of ancient history while playing a game is a great reward in itself. One of the highlights of Immortals are what I call major vaults, which serve as the game's story dungeons and also host 4 optional but significant boss battles. While they have the same appearance and atmosphere as all the other vaults on the island, the challenges and puzzles in the major vaults also weave in the stories of the gods and heroes they pertain to extremely well. One of the unique things about the Golden Isle is that in addition to breaking several of the gods, Typhon also caused 4 major heroes from Greek mythology to fall into darkness. The wraiths of Odysseus, Atalanta, Achilles, and Heracles all terrorize Fenyx at random moments. Until, that is, they find a Wraith's vault and confront them in battle. Upon defeating a Wraith inside their vault, the entire zone becomes somewhat safer to roam without the threat of being randomly jumped on by one of history's strongest heroes. The combat of Immortals Fenyx Rising can be best described as hack and slash with some unique god powers mixed in. Fenyx's primary weapons are the aforementioned sword and axe. The sword is the primary damage dealer, while the axe is used to mostly build stun, as well as reach aerial enemies. God powers are unlocked by completing quests, and by purchasing them using Coins of Haran, which are awarded in various ways throughout the game. Most of the god powers are used to extend combos, reposition yourself for enemies, and deal extra damage. In the later stages of the game, once you have rescued all the gods, received their blessings, and upgraded your abilities, the combat turns into a flashy, fast-paced hack and slash that can be exhilarating when executed properly. The weapons you find in the world don't have any effect on stats, but rather have passive bonuses that affect combat, such as a certain axe may be dealing extra stun on its 4th hit. In order to upgrade the base damage of your weapons, you must spend certain resources at the Hall of the Gods. While the combat of Immortals has some depth, it's almost completely ruined by the stark lack of enemy variety. In total, there are only 15 regular enemy types found in the world and vaults, all of which fall into 3 categories: humanoids, beasts, and mythological creatures. For humanoids, there are soldiers with swords, soldiers with shields, big soldiers with spears, and big soldiers with hammers. For beasts, there are bears, boars, roosters, and lions. For mythological creatures, there are Cyclops, Cerberus, Harpies, Geganies, Gorgons, Griffins, and Minotaurs. Enemies are encountered in camps, and each camp usually has a mix of different enemy types. As you level up and rescue more gods, enemies change color to indicate that they're stronger. All this means, however, is that they have more health and do more damage, and look slightly different. They all have the same moves as their different colored counterparts, and the encounters are handled in the exact same way. What's more is that the so-called legendary boss encounters are just larger versions of the same enemies you've been fighting for the entire game, but they might have 1 or 2 new abilities, or summon lesser enemies for you to quickly dispatch. By the time I reached the final dungeon, I was fighting the same exact enemies I had been fighting since the beginning of the game, except now they were purple instead of red. In all the different biomes of the game, with the exception of the robot enemies in the Forge, there are no unique normal enemies in any area, so the encounters never change. Story bosses and wraiths, however, are unique enemies with unique movesets, but they are few and far between, only adding another 8 enemy types to the total list. The coup de grace is that the rewards for killing enemies are minuscule, making it so you'll eventually end up running past most encounters instead of engaging with them. In some ways, the game actually disincentivizes you from fighting enemies entirely. Almost all the vaults on the island are guarded by a camp of enemies. Instead of fighting, however, the player can just jump right into the vault without so much as unsheathing their sword. If the player completes the vault and finds the hidden chest inside, which is clearly marked by the golden beacon in the sky, the enemies will be permanently despawned when the player exits the vault, completely removing any reason to fight the enemies that were guarding the vault in the first place. Since the rewards for fighting enemies are often found inside vaults anyway, there is little incentive to engage enemies at all. They don't drop any new weapons or armor, and the amount of upgrade materials they do drop can easily be found in a chest somewhere nearby. So while the combat is fun, there is very little reason to actually use it outside of mandatory encounters. One other frustration that I kept coming across in combat is the game's climbing system. Because Fenyx often has to fight harpies, which are flying enemies, they need a way to effectively combat them outside of slowly whittling down their health with a bow and arrow. To round out Fenyx's combat kit, the developers made it so they can jump in the air and fight aerial enemies head-on with the full gamut of attacks and abilities. Additionally, after receiving a certain blessing from Ares, you're able to reset your double jump cooldown by performing specific moves, making it so you can unleash a near endless stream of attacks on aerial enemies without ever touching the floor. The air combat in Immortals is great, but it has one absolutely fatal flaw that I can't believe was missed. Because you can jump and dash while fighting in the air, I often found myself latching onto terrain, killing all my momentum. Instead of dashing through an enemy and automatically having Fenyx turn around to face them, the game instead forces you to latch onto terrain and begin climbing it. This almost always resulted in me taking several hits, losing a bunch of health, as well as having the camera flip out because the game is struggling to decide which camera angle to use, as I'm effectively climbing while in combat. Unless I was fighting in a completely open space like a shrine, which you cannot climb the walls of, I would deliberately not perform long combo chains on aerial enemies or even jump near a wall while fighting a grounded enemy out of fear of getting stuck climbing that wall. It's truly remarkable that this was overlooked, especially considering that there is a trophy awarded for achieving an exceptionally long aerial combo chain. Speaking of vaults, treasure chests, and puzzles, I need to bring up the discovery mechanic in Immortals. In order to locate destinations in the world, including the all-important ambrosia crystals, which are used to upgrade Fenyx's health pool, you must enter first-person mode and scan the landscape. If the cursor gets close to the location of a chest, puzzle, vault, or ambrosia crystal, the controller will vibrate, sort of like a first-person sonar. The stronger the vibration, the closer you are to finding whatever it is that's hiding. Once the cursor reaches the proper location, it emits a very strong vibration, and you can press R2 to reveal what's hiding. For a game that clearly prides itself on its immersive open world, this method of location finding is frustrating for two key reasons. First, aside from just stumbling upon them and completing them, there is no other way to find things in the world and mark them on your map. Second, the only reason to ever go into first-person mode is to perform this action, or to see how close these locations are to Fenyx at any given time, changing what should be a tool to survey the landscape, take in the sights and get your bearings, into a frustrating minigame that never once gives you any indication that you found everything there is to find. There is no system in the game that tells you how many vaults there are, how many total ambrosia flowers you need to collect to max out your health, how many chests there are, how many puzzles there are, and so on. There isn't even a per area breakdown of these things. What's more is that very often puzzles have additional chests very close to them, making it so icons are constantly stacking on top of one another, sometimes 3 or 4 at a time, turning what should be a gorgeous landscape view into a jumbled mess of cartoony icons. Because of all this, I found myself going into first-person mode every few minutes to make sure I've completed an area, but never feeling fully sure that I have. Knowing when you've uncovered all of a particular area's secrets, let alone the entire islands, is a complete guessing game that I've all but given up on. This brings me to my next topic. Upgrade materials, and specifically Zeus's lightning, which is used to upgrade stamina, and the aforementioned ambrosia, which is used to upgrade health. While I'm not against having separate upgrade materials for separate upgrades, the fact that lightning and ambrosia are found in 2 different ways began to frustrate me. Outside of a handful of very specific vaults, ambrosia is exclusively found in the world. Oftentimes it's in a hard-to-reach location that requires some careful planning before climbing or gliding to, and rarely it's tucked away in a locked room that requires a puzzle to be solved in order to gain access. Again, this isn't necessarily a problem, but it becomes an issue when you combine it with the fact that in order to find either of these things, you need to constantly use the first-person view and play the scanning minigame that has no clear end. It becomes an overwhelming mess of a task to attempt to find all of these things. I do my best not to bring up other games in my reviews, but I think I've gone as long as I could without bringing up where this game clearly draws the most of its inspiration, and that's The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Before I go too deep into this, I want to state that I do not think there is anything wrong with borrowing, if not completely copying, mechanics from other games. There is nothing new under the sun, especially in video games. Breath of the Wild didn't invent sonar, it didn't invent puzzle shrines, it didn't invent gliding down from high places, it didn't invent bullet time mechanics in combat, it didn't actually invent anything brand new. What it did, however, was refine so many of these mechanics to near perfection and combined them into a singular experience. It's abundantly clear that Breath of the Wild was a North Star for Immortals Fenyx Rising, and there is nothing wrong with that at all. The only reason I'm bringing up Breath of the Wild is because nearly every time Immortals begins to adopt a mechanic that was refined by Breath of the Wild, the developers stopped halfway, resulting in an underwhelming experience. For example, in Breath of the Wild, shrines reward spirit orbs. Upon accumulating 4 of these orbs, the player had a choice of spending them to upgrade their health or their stamina. This made it so every time a player completed their 4th shrine, they knew they had a very important choice to make that would impact their experience. The player had agency over Link's performance. Additionally, because there was only one resource for health and stamina upgrades, discovering each shrine helped the player inch closer towards a feeling of satisfaction, knowing that they were close to making another decision that would impact how they experience the game. Immortals, however, with its 2 different resources and methods for collecting those resources for health and stamina upgrades, makes it so finding and completing a vault only results in half the satisfaction because only one of the 2 resources they need was rewarded for completing the challenge. Breath of the Wild also had a proximity sonar that would beep whenever the player was close to a shrine. This meant that the only way to discover shrines was either by going to a tall location such as a tower and scanning the landscape for any shrines that stuck out, manually setting waypoints if the player saw something interesting, or through the simple act of walking around the world and waiting for the sonar to beep. Having the sonar go off while walking along a main road encouraged the player to head into the wilderness in search of a new shrine, which in turn forced them to explore more of the hard-to-reach places in the world in hopes of discovering something for themselves. Immortals, on the other hand, makes it so the only way to discover vaults is to scan the landscape in first-person mode until the controller vibrates, then fiddle with the cursor until it's precisely on the vault's location, then press R2 to add the vault's icon to the map. There is no vibration or sound to alert a player if they're near a vault, puzzle, ambrosia flower, or any sort of notable location while walking around. It all must be done in first-person mode, forcing the player out of the world and into a frustrating minigame. The sonar in Breath of the Wild didn't just work for shrines either. The player could set the sonar to beep whenever they drew near certain enemies or resources as well, making it a universal tool that felt like it belonged in the world. This is an important distinction I'm trying to make. Breath of the Wild's discovery systems were a natural part of that game's world. Immortals are not. One game has an ancient device attached to the protagonist's hip that goes off if he gets near what its sonar is set to, and the other game forces the player to constantly go in and out of the map screen or first-person mode to scan for nearby secrets. One game keeps you in the world, while the other removes you from it at seemingly every opportunity. The map in Breath of the Wild manages to incorporate shrines, towns, towers, and landscape into one cohesive design. Yes, you can add waypoints and a certain amount of stickers to it, but for the most part, it's a very, very clean image. By the end of the game, the map in Immortals is absolutely littered with icons that it ends up looking like a tapestry covered in stickers. Again, I try my hardest not to compare the game I'm reviewing to other games. I deliberately go out of my way to make sure I don't do it, as I think every game deserves to be judged on its own. Immortals, however, left me feeling like it's a game that's ashamed to have been inspired by Breath of the Wild and tries to deny it, resulting in an experience that left me feeling unsatisfied at almost every turn. The story, world, and art direction are more than enough to have carried this game to great heights if the mechanics inspired from other games were just left alone. I can't finish this review without talking about one of the final parts of the story, so if you don't want anything spoiled, please skip to the timestamp displayed on the screen to bypass this brief but important spoiler discussion. I'll give you a few seconds to do that now. The story of Immortals is woven beautifully throughout the game, and Fenyx's growth arc, despite being somewhat typical, is great. You start off as a lowly shield bearer who has never fought in a battle, only to end up joining the ranks of Achilles and Odysseus as one of the greatest heroes in this alternate version of Greece's ancient myths. That said, however, there is a serious flaw with both the story and the storytelling at the end of the game. Once you reach the end of the game's final area, King's Peak, you learn that your brother has been working for Typhon the entire time. It's a good twist, even if a bit predictable, as it gives extra motivation for going after Typhon in the final encounter. But if the story of Immortals is a camel, what happens a few minutes later, immediately after dealing the final blow to Typhon, is the straw that breaks the camel's back. In his dying breath, which turns out to not be his dying breath at all, as we're gonna have to fight him a second time after going through an excellent, no exaggeration, excellent final dungeon, Typhon tells Fenyx that they should know the truth that he's known all along, that they are the child of Hermes. While this comes as a shock for obvious reasons to the player, you don't have 5 minutes to sit with this revelation before it's completely upended and retconned. After Typhon slips into the abyss, we leave Fenyx's perspective for the first time and are brought back to Zeus and Prometheus atop the Caucasus Mountains. Remember, the last time we saw them on the screen was at the very beginning of the game, when Prometheus began to tell the tale of Fenyx. The entire game, it's just been a voiceover of Prometheus telling our story with Zeus providing commentary. Here, at the start of the endgame, Zeus tells Prometheus that the part about Fenyx being the child of Hermes does not add up. Prometheus confirms Zeus's suspicion and then reveals that Fenyx is actually the child of Zeus. Just as Prometheus finishes telling Zeus this, Fenyx arrives to confront Zeus, seemingly having already known this. It appears as if Typhon never told Fenyx that they were the child of Hermes, but that Zeus was their father. Let me repeat that. As the player, once you strike the final blow on Typhon, he reveals that Fenyx is the child of Hermes. But once your character arrives at the top of the mountain to confront Zeus and Prometheus, Fenyx already knows that Zeus was their father, despite you, the player, never being told this by Typhon, or having ever seen this happen from Fenyx's perspective. The storytelling at the beginning of the endgame takes a serious nosedive when compared to the entire rest of the game, including the parts that come after this. Why the writers of the game decided to have a twist about Hermes, only to undo that twist and add another twist within just a few minutes at the end of the game, doesn't make any sense to me. The game's story is told by Prometheus, despite the player being in direct control of Fenyx the entire time. This makes it feel like instead of a character lying to one character, and then a twist being revealed to everyone's surprise, including the player, the game instead lies to the player, which, in my opinion, is a terrible way of telling a story in a video game. It leads to a ton of unnecessary confusion, especially when there is a much stronger way of telling the same story. Typhon could have just told Fenyx that they were the child of Zeus, then Fenyx confronts Zeus and everything plays out the same. Instead, Fenyx is told that they are the child of Hermes, but not really, because it was just Prometheus lying to Zeus for all of 5 minutes. It's not rare for me to go back and watch my gameplay recordings to make sure I understood a detail in a game, especially when it comes to the story, but I rewatched this endgame sequence at least 10 times to make sure I was clear on what actually happened. I can't sit here and write a nice essay sentence about how this is yet another example of how Immortals is not confident in itself, because that doesn't go far enough. This just felt like a producer read the writing and said, there aren't enough twists, add one more here, despite it making no sense to have it when the story of the game is told from the omniscient, third-person point of view like it is in Immortals. Ultimately, I find myself caught between a rock and a hard place when it comes to recommending Immortals Fenyx Rising. As a fan of Greek mythology, I had a great time immersing myself in the trappings of the Golden Isle and learning the tales of its many heroes. The storytelling is unique and engaging, and the agency I had over my character's identity was a breath of fresh air. The combat was a lot of fun, and by the end of the game, I truly felt like a demigod, building my combo meter well above 100 without getting hit. But every time someone asks me if it's worth purchasing at full price, I hesitate to say yes. Every mechanic and system has some glaring shortcoming that could have been alleviated if the developers just fully committed to borrowing from their inspirations. Normally, I'd say wait for a complete edition that's sold at a discount after the DLC comes out, but Immortals already has a gold edition for $100 that includes the DLC. For that reason, I recommend waiting on a price drop for the gold edition before purchasing this game. Perhaps by then, some quality of life updates will have been made to the base game. I don't want this review to go down as someone not liking a game because it's not Breath of the Wild. I don't want Immortals to be Breath of the Wild. I'm just severely disappointed that it's ashamed of its inspiration instead of embracing it and putting its own spin on it. Immortals Fenyx Rising is not a bad game, but it stops itself from being a great game every chance it gets because it does not have confidence in its own original ideas.